The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get stinko.
Welcome, Giles and the Goalie Podcast. I'm Giles Farrell. Next to me is Ben Remington.
Hello.
On the eve of the great Minnesota get-together, we at the Giles and the Goalie Podcast get together. See what I did there?
Yeah.
I've been working on that all day.
That's not bad.
We get together because the Minnesota Wild have a new general manager on August 21st. In the year of our Lord, 2019. This afternoon, the Minnesota Wild announced about 45 minutes after the story was broke by Michael Russo. Actually, originally...
Kevin Weeks.
Kevin Weeks of NHL Network had it.
Which is weird.
Obviously, you wait for Russo to fire that into the Twitter sphere. But Bill Guerin has been named the new Minnesota Wild general manager, which is why we are convening here on August 21st to record a podcast.
Wait, we're not podcasting because they got a dog?
No.
Oh. I thought that was...
That would have been a newsworthy thing on our return podcast. Not...
Oh.
We're not breaking into...
But his name is Breezer, Giles. Breezer.
There's many, many other names you could have come up with.
I think it's funny, just a short aside here, that Breezer is kind of this regionality thing for Minnesota, because naming a dog Hockey Pants probably just really doesn't have the same ring to it. But we should start calling them that, because that's a way better name.
We have Hockey Pants bombing the Minnesota Wild Twitter account, and then we have actual pants on your television telling you about the Minnesota Wild during hockey games.
Yes.
So
not to be confused.
It all ties together somehow.
Yes.
But anyway, Bill Guerin, previously of the Pittsburgh Penguins, 48 years old, spent the last 8 seasons with the Pittsburgh Penguins in their front office following his retirement from the NHL in 2010. A veteran of 18 seasons in the National Hockey League, 856 points, and was a part of the Stanley Cup champion New Jersey Devils in 1995 and 2009 with the Pittsburgh Penguins before making the transition to the front office. I started out as player development with the Penguins, and then in 2014 was promoted to assistant general manager, not assistant to the general manager, just assistant general manager, and where he has spent the last 5 seasons. In the past 2 years, more specifically, he was given a little bit of promotion, seeing the day-to-day operations of Wilkes-Barre Scranton, the AHL affiliate of Pittsburgh. So there is a little bit of background on Bill Guerin. If you want to read more, check out zonecoverage.com/wild. I did a piece on him 2 weeks ago in my general manager candidate series. But we will hear more from Bill Guerin Thursday, tomorrow, at his introductory press conference.
Probably before you listen to this podcast.
Probably.
We
probably should have waited, but...
We're just so excited, Giles.
Yeah, let's just get the emergency pod out of the way, and then... Because it actually, saving the introductory press conference gives me something to write about. It's how we create hashtag content in these dog days of August.
We didn't even think about delaying the emergency podcast until tomorrow night when we would have quotables from him.
I actually did listen to a radio spot he did today on local radio.
Nice.
He did do an appearance on Drive Time in the Twin Cities. That's not the That's not the name of just on the Drive Time.
I was like,
slot.
what kind of lame ass name for a show is that?
Well, I thought of 15 jokes that just flew into my head. None of them suitable for the air.
That's true.
No, he did. He was on Drive Time Radio this afternoon, and I actually caught the interview. First started out by pandering to the great fans of the state of hockey.
Oh God!
Which I know I saw our friend Joe Booley just had a little fit about that. Which it's sanctioned, Joe. I'm not putting you down. It's a sanctioned fit. But he started with that. And then he was kind of just asked, generic, bland questions that, not the advanced hockey, minds would, maybe have cared to have asked. But he did, you did kind of learn that, he seemed to wants to take a little bit more of a patient approach with this hockey team. He said great things about the staff already that's been assembled. He obviously said that, there will be some changes to the staff down the line, bringing his own people, but he's not looking to, shuffle people out the door right away as his predecessor might have, wanted to do.
Hey, his predecessor didn't shove everybody out the door right away. I mean, he demoted them to the basement first, then he shoved them out the door.
Yeah, he kicked them to the basement, then shoved them out the door.
He demoted them for a half season, then shoved them out the door.
That's fair, but he seems, wants to take that a little bit of a patient approach, and I'm guessing he's going to take that same approach with the roster. He seems to believe that this roster can win. He didn't necessarily say it, but he made it sound like they can make the playoffs. He had not had a chance to speak with head coach Bruce Boudreau, and that's kind of a big question: is what does the future for the head coach hold? Those were kind of my big takeaways. Other than he was kind of asked some speculation questions about players going around the general manager to the owner, which he kind of sidestepped it smartly, in my opinion. So, thoughts on Bill Guerin as the new general manager?
Well, it's always hard, and when Paul Fenton was hired, we said the same things we're about to say, right? Hey, he comes from an organization that's run well, who knows how much he actually had to do with it, and but you can't argue with the success from the front office he came from, and he seems like a very passionate guy, and he knows the game of hockey well. He's obviously worked in the front office for a long time now, and has earned a lot of respect from around the league. And a lot of people say that he's a great hire, and so these are smart hockey people that are saying this, so I'm inclined to take their word for it. I mean, we literally said all of those things about Paul Fenton, and I think we can safely say at this point that Fenton's tenure was a dumpster fire. So that's the thing, the unfortunate thing about, unless hires are really, really bad, you really don't have much to go off of. I mean, unless the Wild would have hired Peter Chiarelli, which, praise Christ, they did not. It would have been a much more entertaining podcast if they did, but, unless they make a move like that where you can just rip it to shreds because it's dumb from the get-go, it's really tough to judge these things, especially for a first-time GM, which the Wild seem to be collecting. It's really tough to say, well, he knows what he's doing. He made this trade and he drafted this guy and et cetera, et cetera. Well, he can't really hang his name on any of that stuff. And that's what we found out with Paul Fenton is that, well, yeah, he was in the room for the PK Subban for Shea Weber trade, but from what we've learned, he was probably the guy screaming at them not to do it. He was
probably screaming at the analytics person in the room to get the hell out.
Yeah, no, I don't care. Have you seen how big Shea Weber is? Are you kidding me? How tall he is when he walks up to the draft table? So, it's tough to say. It's like, how much did Bill Guerin have to do with the success of the Penguins recently? Who knows? He spent, a fair amount of time with Scranton Wilkes-Barre, which I have so many questions about Scranton that I want to ask him, but I digress. I don't know. It looks like a good hire. Everyone says it's a good hire. Everyone says he's a great guy. Everyone says he's a great guy. That's maybe the one juxtaposition to Paul Fenton if you look back, I don't know. There was a lot of people saying he was a great guy. There was a lot of people saying that he was passionate. There was a lot of people saying that he was, determined, committed, all those other intense words that followed an intense personality. So at the very least, and I think with the hiring process, probably what it was, with the fact that they S-canned their general manager after one season, I think that Leopold and his team were very focused on getting somebody who fit the culture and somebody who was somebody that people wanted to work for, somebody who, could lead people and is a personable human being, because Paul Fenton was none of those things.
Well, and by all accords, Bill Guerin definitely fits that criteria. He appears to be somebody who is well respected and is a good motivational leader in the front office, and has a great sense of humor, which and Paul Fenton never seemed to have. I mean, had he announced the trade of Rask for Niederreiter and then came back and said, "Oh yeah, I'm just kidding," we might have had a laugh, but no, he didn't.
No,
that wasn't a joke.
He didn't do that.
He was serious.
Yep.
He was always serious.
Very.
But yeah, so he appears to be the opposite of Fenton in those regards. Not a whole lot to go on right now in terms of how he's going to go about, building a roster. We'll probably know more tomorrow.
Yeah.
After that, in which you can read my analysis on zonecoverage.com/wild.
Yeah.
But, other things kind of looking out for is, again, the head coach. What's he going to do there? How does he approach, free agency in years down the road? And then kind of the bigger elephant in the room is analytics, which we don't really know a whole lot about on him. Does he hate them? Does he value them? Does he, have a crush on them? It remains to be seen. I'm guessing somebody is going to ask that tomorrow. I certainly hope somebody's going to ask that tomorrow, because the Wild Analytics Department previously, which was a very well-respected analytics department, was burned to the ground. There is nothing but cold, lifeless ash left.
It's an abacus locked in a drawer right now. That's the extent of the Wild's analytic department.
It's a broom closet with a Windows 95 computer in it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I get the feeling, and this is maybe just generalizing, and maybe not fair to Guerin, but as a former player, a guy who played a long time in the NHL, he wasn't a superstar, but he was an all-star on occasion.
He's a good player, yeah.
He was a good player, yeah. Maybe not a Hall of Famer, but a great player in his time. I probably think he's probably not a big analytics guy. What you would hope for, being someone like we are, some folks that are inclined to listen to this podcast, you would hope that he's just open-minded to it. Whereas I feel like Paul Fenton, he had some quotable on his press conference about analytics where it's like, yeah, you need them, but, scouting is still the most important thing. And that was coming from a guy who wasn't a high-level player, who ended up in the front office very early, ended up scouting, I guess, more or less very early, and had the mind of a scout. Whereas Bill Guerin has never been a scout.
Right.
He's a front office guy that, was retired into a front office, a la an Andrew Brunette type or a Brad Bombardier type. He moved into that role, and so he hasn't pounded the pavement like Paul Fenton did scouting for so long. And so that might be an advantage. That might be something that allows Bill Guerin to look at hockey in a different way, even though he was a very successful player for a long time. Hopefully, he has an open mind to these things. I'm very much assuming we'll find out tomorrow. As publicized as it was that the Wild wiped out their entire scouting staff, I gotta think there's going to be at least one question that's going to allude to that, and he's going to have to give some kind of stance on it. And it's probably going to be a milquetoast answer. It's probably going to be you gotta look at the numbers sometimes, but you gotta trust your scouts too. He's probably going to give something like that. But I want to just hear that he's open to it. I want to just hear that he considers that, and and that he's willing to get help, because that's what analytics are. It's just help. And Paul Fenton, we're stressing analytics like it's the most important thing in hockey, and we both are of the thinking that it's not the most important thing in hockey.
No.
But it plays a very, very big role, enough to the point where you cannot flat out ignore it the way that Paul Fenton did. And that was Fenton's problem, and that's what part of Fenton's undoing.
And the other thing is with analytics now is you're going to get this infusion of player tracking data that's going to come in, and this really hurts with the loss of the War on Ice folks that the Wild previously had. Especially Alex Mandrycky, who was apparently very good at making information very readable to those who, don't quite understand it.
Paul Fenton.
So, yeah. So, breaking down all that data and putting it into something that is readable and usable for NHL general managers is going to be crucial. And so it will be interesting to see what he has to say on it and how the Wild are going to go forward with their broom closet and Windows 95 computer that currently serves as the analytics department. Other thing I kind of wonder about this process was very early in the process, in fact, when Paul Fenton was fired, Craig Leopold said he wanted to hire somebody who had previous experience, and Ron Hextall was tossed out immediately as kind of the front-running candidate for the position. He interviewed. Apparently, it was a very good interview. I don't know if he got a second one. I
don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that he did.
Uh-huh.
Because once Guerin interviewed, the Wild did interview a handful of candidates and some other miscellaneous people like Brian Lawden and Pierre Maguire. But
forgot about that.
But
I mean, I repressed that.
Right, as you should. But once Guerin interviewed, he kind of stepped into the front-running status, and then
really
once he had the second interview, which was reported by Russo and The Athletic, then you never really saw anyone else get a second second interview. I
think a couple of guys did. Did Mellenby get a second interview? I think I remember seeing that.
I don't remember if he
Maybe
did.
It was Mellenby and Hextall did get second interviews, maybe. I don't know. It's all a blur at this point. I mean,
I did. To be fair, I did try to stay up to date on this.
Yeah, so did I.
It's interesting.
What's interesting to me, and this is going to be a question that a lot of, negative dicks of the world are going to bring up. You got to wonder how much Modano was involved with this, with Guerin being hired. I mean, they flat out told us. Leopold flat out said Modano would be in the room. He would be a part of this search. And that carries a lot of weight, and he's a Hall of Famer, and, maybe his input isn't a bad thing, but you got to kind of wonder. I mean, you got to wonder when Guerin, obviously a former teammate of Modano, I don't know if you can say a friend, maybe a friend of Modano's, but when he kind of gets one interview and then runs away with the job, you wonder how much input Modano had,
It's a conspiracy.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just that's just something that's I'm sure going to be thrown out there in a negative light, and maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't be. I don't know, but it just seems like that's with Guerin kind of running away with the job from almost from the word jump. Maybe Mike Modano did have a lot to do with it, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe, who knows?
Mike Modano, as referenced, was part of the hiring process here with the Wild, as he kind of did some background research around the league on prospective candidates, kind of reaching out, doing behind-the-scenes work to maybe get a little more input on these people.
Lots of text messaging.
Unlike last year, a lot of phone calls, a lot of glad handing, a lot of golf.
Yeah.
Unlike last year, where the Wild didn't have anyone kind of with a hockey background, one, putting in hockey questions for interviews, and then two, kind of doing background research on candidates, which may have mentioned Paul Fenton is kind of an ass. So,
well, I thought Ryan Suter hired Paul Fenton. I thought he had to rubber stamp that thing. I thought it was all him. He got He got Fletcher fired. He got Fenton hired. This is all on Ryan Suter, right?
You are just full of conspiracy theories today. Sir.
I'm antagonistic as usual.
What?
Suhan's got me all fired up. I'm
boy.
itching for a fight. I got blocked. I didn't get the fight I wanted.
Boy, yeah. Well, apparently nobody did last night on Twitter, as others on that platform were egging for a fight. But anyway, So, do you have any other blazing questions you would like to ask Bill Guerin as he's about to set sail on the RMS Titanic?
I think the things that I want to hear from Guerin, we talked about analytics. That's pretty obvious. Another one is, it's not going to be a question that's going to be brought up, but
soup.
Definitely that. We definitely need that. We definitely need a Mount Rushmore of jerseys from him. I think those are the important questions that people really need to know. But I think maybe the most important thing, and there's a lot of stuff brought up about Craig Leopold when Fenton was fired, and how he's getting this reputation as kind of a meddling owner. And, was it the right call in firing Fenton? I absolutely believe that, just based on what we've heard about him and how he treated his staff and how things went down this season. I don't know that you can necessarily hang that all on Craig Leopold. But I also think it is fair to say that he is a very involved owner, and it might be to a detriment of the team. So I think I would like to hear Guerin give not only his impression of Leopold, but what his plan looks like, maybe versus what the conversations that him and Leopold have had.
He did shed a little bit of light on that in his radio spot today. Not thoroughly, but he might go a little bit more on that tomorrow. He just kind of said that Leopold and Matt Maka, who was also in on the interviews, were very personable human beings, and it made the interviews a lot easier for him to kind of just say, hey, here's my plan or whatever. And Guerin said he didn't really ask any questions. He had, just a few, but not a lot for them, which I found interesting.
That's
but
weird, but
they were more the ones that did the asking of the questions, as a normal interview should go.
Sure.
But that was really all he kind of said on that. And as I said previously, he kind of sidestepped the meddling owner question towards the end of his spot.
Sure,
so.
and I totally understand that, and he should for his own job.
Yeah, you don't want to piss off your boss on the first day.
It's a bad time to do that. But yeah, I want to get his honest opinion on that. I know we're never going to hear that, but I just want to be like, hey, what do you think the deal is with Leopold? How much pressure is he putting on you to field a competitive team right now versus building a team you believe the way it should be built to win a Stanley Cup? That's the biggest thing. I think there's other smaller questions you could ask him, but I mean that has to be the elephant in the room, along with analytics, of course.
And there are some other fires that he kind of has to put out immediately. I talked about how he kind of wants to take a patient approach through the season, but he does also have some pressing things that he has to take care of. Like, he has to start having an attack strategy for draft scouting for the next year.
Sure.
He has to get in front of Jared Spurgeon's agent, Eustace King, and kind of feel out what's going to be the ask, because Paul Fenton just did the Lord's work of, making sure that Jared Spurgeon was wholeheartedly pissed
Did not feel
before he
welcome.
got his foot out the door. And then getting in front of Kirill Kaprizov and assuring him that this is not a tire fire going on right now, that he is going to be around for a while, and that he does want Kaprizov here, and that, you are still valued and you do have a place in this lineup in the top six. Those are some other pressing things that, he has to think about, I should say. And then, there's some other minor things like, Mikko Koivu's in the last year of his contract. What do you do with Zach Parise, who made it abundantly clear that he was not very pleased with the direction of this last season and, kind of what took place in the offseason?
How could he not?
So Parise did come back this last week and say, oh, yeah, no, my bad. I'm psyched to go. And just it could not have been a more of. He just sat there and he mulled on that, thinking about what he said, and then he was like, "Oh man, I better put this fire out."
I just got someone
So
fired.
He just dials up Russo and says, "All right, let's do this." But
Well, I think not to say that you're wrong about Parisi, because I'm sure he did backpedal a little bit, but after Fenn was fired, I mean, there's got to be a little sigh of relief from everybody on that team.
It was justification for what Parisi said. Like,
sure,
I'm
absolutely.
not discrediting what he said. He's frustrated. He wants to win at this point of his career, and I totally understand. I was taking more of a sarcastic tone there at the end of my remarks.
Sure. I think that's all very interesting. And another thing too that we haven't even touched on, which is wild.
Zing.
Nope. I kind of want to get Guerin's feeling on a couple of upcoming events, such as expansion. That'll be something that I want to hear him talk about as far as in relation to how involved he was in Pittsburgh. Obviously, they gave it Marc-Andre Fleury, which wasn't a small thing, in the expansion draft, but was kind of, you could also see that coming, and it was very much cap relief for them. And also the lockout. I mean, we haven't gotten into the thick of that. I just saw a tweet today about, seeing the first lockout article of the season. Ooh, there's going to be plenty. There's going to be quite a few of them. So, hearing him talk about how he wants to navigate that inevitability as a first-time general manager after his first season, I think is going to be very interesting. And obviously, maybe he doesn't have a whole lot of answers right now, but just hearing him speak to maybe how much preparation he is putting into that again, inevitable event, just to kind of put this team in the best possible spot that it can be.
Right. For what it's worth, Bill Guerin did get the Sidney Crosby seal of approval. Sid seal of approval.
Cool.
Bill Guerin will be trying to get the Minnesota chapter of the Sid seal of approval tomorrow if 98-year-old Sid Hartman does show up to XL Energy Center if he remembers the way.
Well, the Twins are off, so that helps.
Right. And I think maybe the Vikings have a day off too.
Oh,
I don't know. But
wow.
anyway. I don't know. I think I got everything that I feel he needed to kind of address tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
He did also announce that Joel Eriksson Ek was re-signed to a 2-year contract.
Wait.
Which was orchestrated by interim general manager Tom Curvers.
Well, good for him.
That was something that was just announced coincidentally after Guerin took the helm today. But
I didn't catch that.
$1.4875 million cap hit for each of the next 2 seasons for Joel Eriksson Ek.
That's a good bridge deal.
So that's a good deal. Just the fourth permanent general manager in the history of the Minnesota Wild joins the likes of Doug Risebrough, Chuck Fletcher, and Paul Fenn. That's quite a Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. God. This is the kind of thing, and I hate to really crank up the revisionist history here, but you and I were a little bit Fletcher apologists. Maybe a lot of it.
And we still could be, right? Actually, we still probably are now.
Right. But we both agreed when he was fired, it was time to move on. It was time for something different, some change. What he had tried obviously hadn't worked to the level that people wanted it to. But this is exactly what we talked about when people were pining for Fletcher to be fired.
Yeah, the grass isn't always greener on this side.
The general instability that brings, and maybe Bill Guerin is a fantastic hire and will lead this team for 2 decades and many wins.
Considered to be a big up-and-comer.
Yeah, and so maybe that's true. But this is what we were talking about. Like, this is the risk you run when you fire a general manager that's pretty entrenched and has done, for the most part, a decent to good job. This is what you run into. This is, you end up taking gambles on first-time GMs like this, or, God forbid, I think we would rather have this. I'd rather have Guerin than any of the retreads that were brought up. I mean, good God. the fact that Peter Chiarelli's name was even mentioned was horrifying. It was like when you see that girl from The Ring. It was just you die instantly.
If you followed my series on zone coverage of the candidate process, there was just, when it came to the retreads, there was just kind of an underlying tone of they're all bad.
Yeah.
And friend Brian Reynolds picked up on that, and he said, so everything is bad, got it. And that was, it was low-key something that I didn't mean to do, but every time I would sit down and do the background research on the retreads, I'd be like, man, this is terrible. Like, especially Don Waddell. People pining over Don Waddell. I don't get it. He had one good year last year.
Yeah.
Everything turned to gold in Carolina, and he just used that year as leverage to get a new contract from Tom Dundon, who apparently doesn't believe in contracts. But
yeah, I think the only retread that I would have not thrown up over was Hextall.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to be excited about him, don't get me
No.
wrong. But I think he's the type where it's like, okay, he had one run, let's say let's think he maybe learned from his mistakes, and learned some things. But all the rest of them, my God, I mean, I think the riot would have been justified had they hired literally anybody else that the names that were brought up.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was much more palatable to go again with the route of a first-time general manager, especially in this league where it is just a bunch of retreads. I'm sorry,
Boys Club.
I beat this like a dead horse almost every show, but the NHL is an old boys club. So hiring somebody new, even though he had an extensive history of playing in the league, but an up-and-comer in the front office ranks, is definitely something you should be trying more and more. Don't go back to somebody else because they just have experience. So that's the hope with Bill Guerin, is he will obviously have his lumps, and as we've learned with general managers in their first year, just take their lumps in their first year. Although Bill Guerin might be just trying that patient approach, like we said. So that might actually do him better to just be patient over the next year. And unless the Wild are really out of it at the trade deadline, I really can't envision the Wild making major roster trades during the season. Well,
we really saw that out of Fenton, right? He didn't make a move for a while, and then the floodgates opened.
I mean, he was trying. He tried.
That's true.
He tried right away.
He was trying to get rid of Jason Zucker like no one's business.
He tried to get Christian Dvorak and somebody else from Arizona for
Domi.
Zucker and Niederreiter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So patience from Guerin might do him better. Remember that
Yes.
over the next year, even if it's a little turbulent again. Yeah, I'm curious I wish I could actually just sit down with him and get his actual thoughts on the roster, because if you ask him right now in public, he'll just give you,
Player speak.
right,
Yeah.
coach speak,
Coach
front
speak,
office
player
speak,
front office speak, yeah.
whatever you want to call it. But I am curious to see what he thinks of the roster. I am curious to see how he'll handle the goaltending situation. I'm sure that's piqued your interest too. But obviously, you have Saint Al Stalock for another 3 years. So, I'm sure there's whatever. I think we kind of covered everything Guerin related that we could here into a half hour.
Yeah, there isn't much to say.
Right.
Again, and the press conference is going to give us some things, but
Right.
I don't know that it's going to give us a lot. Like, he's not going to blow our effing minds. They never do.
No.
I think the most interesting thing, we talked about analytics. We talked about, and you mentioned it, was Boudreau.
that
that's
almost
gonna
certainly
be
has to be
a
question 1 or
yeah.
2 tomorrow.
Yep.
But yeah, that's I don't know, and it is encouraging. You kind of see Bruce around here in the state during the summer, so if Guerin seemingly, and Guerin did give a lot of respect to Bruce on the radio today. So
Yeah.
if there is some interest from Guerin in bringing Bruce back, I'm sure he would certainly be not opposed to staying on.
Well, and it could be a thing as simple as, he respects Bruce. I'm sure he does. But Bruce has only got 1 year left on his coaching contract, and we'll see how this season goes. Bruce is in his 60s. He might not want to come back. He might just want to leave on his own terms, and I think we've talked about this. His contract has kind of a consulting gig kind of woven into it. That could very well be something that Guerin takes advantage of and says, hey, leaves it up to Bruce. If you want to take this avenue, let's do it. Versus Paul Fenton, who, literally could not fire Bruce Boudreau fast enough, but literally wasn't allowed to. So
right.
I think that's kind of probably what we're looking at. So that might be anticlimactic, I guess, and we'll just kind of have to see how the season goes.
Yeah. No, we'll probably get a lot of answers tomorrow, maybe. But answers definitely won't come, quickly. They'll come over time, and unless it's another Paul Fenton redo, which I would have to believe we're not going to have again. It'll be a few years before we go through this again, where we have to talk about a new general manager. So
yeah, I think that Guerin, I would put the minimum shelf life on him at about 3 seasons.
That's fair.
I think that's probably what Fenton would have gotten.
I'm guessing that's what multi-year contract means.
Right, that too. I'm guessing that's what Fenton would have gotten had he not been such a huge dick. And from all indications, again, Guerin seems like a very nice guy, and everybody loves him. So I think he's going to get timed with this team. So, yeah, I think this is some stability that the Wild need, obviously, and any new general manager would have been stability, but it's just it'll be kind of nice that, now that they've made sure and hired somebody that can actually run a staff and actually talk to people, he's going to be around for a little while at least, and we can kind of get a real feel for what he can actually do.
Yeah. No, like I said, we'll get everything tomorrow, and check out zonecoverage.com/wild for my written works on this hire. Any other thoughts before we set sail?
I'm pretty pumped for the fair.
Strollers at the state fair.
Yeah, I am. I told myself I was going to diet leading up to said fair. And that lasted about a week and a half, I think. So now I'm just going to be a slob and just eat nonstop. I
did the Iowa State Fair last weekend. It was okay. I mean, I'm not going to say it's great, but it's okay. The thing I did like, and I told some people this, the thing I did like is they have a singular craft beer area. They have a huge craft beer tent with over 60 beers on tap that are a lot of which are unique to the fair in Iowa.
Sure.
And that was very great. You have a lot of different options to sample them, or a lot of purchasing options. You can get, packages that have, a bunch of little sample cups, or you can get packages that just have the big, 16-ounce cups.
Sure.
And so I got to try a lot of different beers, and that was very fun. I love a good craft beer, in addition to just the slob it up with the light beer.
Sure.
But that I did enjoy, and I wish, if I had to make one nitpicky little change to the Minnesota State Fair, that would be it, is putting all the unique craft beers and just that in one centralized area.
Sure,
which they kind of do, but some of the unique beers you do have to go run around and try to find.
A little bit, yeah.
But, yeah, that would be my one nitpicky thing. But otherwise, the Minnesota State Fair is superior and number one in everything.
So what size is the Iowa State Fair geographically compared to the Minnesota State Fair? Is it half
in a heated
real estate?
In a heated debate with my my missus, we went back and forth saying our respective state fair was bigger in terms of acreage, and then it was like a baseball bat to the head when it was found that the Iowa State Fair actually was bigger in terms of acres.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You wouldn't think so when you're there, but it is, which is amazing.
Well, I can only imagine they have even more agricultural type stuff there than the Minnesota State Fair does.
My allergies were awful last weekend. I just couldn't. I had to take allergy
Because the
pills.
Minnesota State Fair does a pretty good job of
All
containing that.
Dander just
You
sitting in
know,
the corn.
They
yeah.
have those buildings that are specifically made for that. I gotta assume the Iowa State Fair is more spread out, just because
Yeah.
I'm sure it's way more agriculturally based than even the Minnesota State Fair, which is a lot of agriculture stuff. I could see that. So that's interesting that it's bigger geographically, but still has the one centralized area. You would think that would be not hard to get to, but it would create kind of a logjam of sorts. And I think the population of the Minnesota State Fair is obviously probably a lot more. So it'd be really tough to squeeze that into, like, let's say, for instance, they just converted the food building into the craft beer building. I mean, that would be nightmarish if
Right.
they did that. So,
Right, and that's not to say, like, there's really nothing like the food building at the Iowa State Fair. So,
Sure.
That's a check in the box for Minnesota.
of course.
But, yeah, no, it's okay. Like, if you're thinking about going, I would say, check it out. I can give you some food recs.
Was there Casey's Pizza on a stick?
No.
Oh.
It's disappointing. But yeah, the Minnesota State Fair outside of the beer tent is superior.
Okay.
So that's
Be expected.
obviously coming up here. I'll have I think I'm going once, maybe twice.
Okay.
I know you're going twice.
I am.
But yeah, that's always big. And then the fair ends and it's Labor Day, and then training camp is just another week after that, seemingly. So
Wow.
it's coming up.
We should probably decide if we're podcasting or not.
Probably.
Yeah.
Should probably make an informed
Should get
decision.
around to that.
Roz did send a text midway through the show here. She wants us to talk about Miracle on Ice forward Mark Pavlich, charged with assault. She sent me the link to that article. I'm just going to randomly throw that in there because she sent it, so I'm going to acknowledge her. I don't want to be rude.
It's just like the whole celebrity TMZ gossip kind of thing. That is very much Roz's wheelhouse. Like, that is...
Well, see, we need her for that then, because I'm
No.
very not TMZ.
Me too, and I like it that way. I much prefer it that way. I don't have a damn clue what's going on with celebrities, and it's glorious. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I never really see what's going on with celebrities, and the one time I venture into what's trending on Twitter, so and so got divorced or somebody got married. Like, apparently, it's a thing now that YouTubers, when they get married, that trends on Twitter.
Why?
That doesn't make any sense.
Are they
to me.
that popular now, I suppose? They're like celebrities, I guess.
Furthering the report that Roz sent me, Mark Pavlich charged with felony assault for beating his neighbor with a metal pole, breaking several bones.
Wow. He didn't screw around.
The complaint says Pavlich told authorities he believed the man spiked, in quotes, his beer, prompting the alleged assault. Victim had a bruised kidney, several broken bones, including 2 cracked ribs and a fractured vertebrae.
Oh, Mark didn't hold back.
First responders found him in, quote, shock with, quote, obvious disfigurement of his leg.
Okay, then. Well,
So we're going to leave on that happy note.
There's a clear misunderstanding there, I feel like. Good Lord.
Yikes. But that's your news update from the desk of Roz and Frank.
Yes.
I'm sure he had a hand in that.
Sort of.
But yeah, that will wrap it up for this otherwise fine podcast. At Giles Farrell on Twitter, at Ben Remington on Twitter if you haven't blocked him, like columnists.
I'd understand if you do.
iTunes, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play. If you're wanting to subscribe to this podcast, if you do listen on iTunes, leave us a rating. It helps boost us up in the iTunes metrics, blah, blah, blah. Zonecoverage.com/wild. Again, I will be writing there. You can find our podcast, and you can also find a new hockey podcast on the network, Huck Dish, hosted by Tom Chorsky of FSN. So
Cool.
Give that a listen. He's been interviewing some pretty prominent figures around the sports world, not just Minnesota related. So give that a listen as well. You can again find it on Zone Coverage. So yeah, that is all for us, and we will check back with you again soon, maybe.
Yeah, later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.